Hello to everybody. So welcome to Jedi Disruption. These are direct, no-nonsense conversations with leaders on technology and science. So I'm André Lezecourt-Pietri. I'm the director of Jedi, which is the European Initiative for Disruptive Innovation. As you know, we launch grand challenges on large societal issues like environment, energy, digital, and new frontiers like space and oceans. And we are absolutely delighted today to have a very high-level guest, which is Gilles de Kerchove, who is first a friend of Jedi, and most importantly, the EU coordinator for anti-terrorism. So, Gilles, very, very nice to have you with us. So, you're a key player in Europe and thinker on the topics of technology and security. If I may ask very directly, we are in the middle, exiting the first, hopefully the last phase of the COVID-19 crisis. What's your big learning of it?
I will draw my lesson mainly in my field, security and terrorism. The first lesson is, unlike what we thought, it has not led in the short term to more terrorist attacks in Europe. I think outside Europe, it was a bit, I wouldn't say business as usual, but the pace and the pressure of terrorism kept developing as it was before. So it has not had a direct impact. Where I see a potential impact is in the coming months, if there is a serious, and most likely the case, economic crisis, both the economic crisis, the social isolation, the confinement to a certain extent, where a lot of youth were not in school, had too much time to spend on internet, they were forced to be on internet, that may just increase the vulnerabilities. And therefore, that's a unique opportunity that the terrorist organizations have seized. So that's the first point. The second point is, of course, the major role that the internet, social media have played throughout even more than before. And the terrorist organization, but not just the terrorist violent organization, and state, they have tried to avail themselves of all that to mobilize supporters and just to promote their propaganda. And here I just want to pinpoint three aspects which I find quite interesting. The first one is that, as I said, all the groups, Daesh, Al-Qaeda, but right-wing violent extremism, left-wing violent extremism, did try to maximize to the extent possible internet to promote their propaganda. The second one is on fake news, on disinformation. It's interesting that the proliferation of conspiracy theory was fueled at the same time by state actors and non-state actors, as I've just said. And in a way, I see some sort of convergence between the classical terrorism speech developed by Daesh and Al-Qaeda, the hate speech, mostly developed by the right-wing part, and the disinformation, probably, we know, spread by some states. And that should lead to some change in our policy response. For the time being, we have different track, different response with the internet companies for these three types of content. And the last one, I hope I'm wrong, but I'm more and more worried to see coming a new forms of radicalization, which I myself call technophobia. You may have seen in the Netherlands, in the UK, 5G masts have been destroyed, fire on it. And I would not be surprised if in the coming years, you will see more and more people feeling a bit alienated or marginalized by all this disruptive tech developing so quickly, Internet of Things, CCTV, artificial intelligence, and so on. And maybe some might be maybe led to violence because they don't feel well because of that. If you mix that with another set of people who believe that the world is collapsing, and they believe they should now use violence to wake up politicians because they have not taken the right decision to address the problem of global warming, we may be in trouble for this development, which will happen anyway. So these are some of the not lessons, but some of the thought that all this inspired to me. The last one is a very interesting debate about privacy and security, which is always at the core of all of our policy when it comes to the apps to detect people infected. And I was very surprised to see that people were probably less demanding in terms of privacy when it comes to their health than they are when it comes to their security. And I thought it was an interesting development.
Absolutely, and we saw that with the tracing apps. I mean, probably we missed a big opportunity in Europe to have to do something at scale. So every country basically went their own way. Some with success. I mean, some maybe less. We heard the German app has now been downloaded more than 8 million times. And it's surprising because if there's really one country which is very strong on privacy is
the most demanding country on that front. Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's a very interesting reflection. We'll probably come back on that, but I also wanted to ask you security and technology. Something which when you go obviously to China, when you go to the US right now, this is a topic where really there is a strong interaction between the technology players and government and the justice system. Where do we stand in Europe? Have we really taken all the awareness of the impact these new technologies? And could you tell us a bit more which technologies can have a major impact on this?
My assessment is, of course, they live in today's world, in the law enforcement and justice community, so they're aware that they start working on all this artificial intelligence, but probably not quickly enough, and not just in relation to AI. I would mention all the disruptive tech, blockchain, quantum computing, even if it does not work for the time being. The nanotechnologies, the new materials, 3D printing, synthetic bio, and the like. I won't list them all. And one example of that is if you look at the recent communication of the Commission, excellent communication by the Vice President Vestager and by Commissioner Breton on AI, on data, strategy for data. Security is only looked at in terms of risks, biased algorithm.
That's the February communication.
The risk of the slippery slope towards a Chinese social control model and the like, and never as potential. So I think this community should, and it has only started now, looking at the risk and threat, the potential, and what I call the transformative effect of all this. The risk, we know them, I won't list them all, but it just amplify existing threats. AI and cyber, you can just have more automated hacking, create new threat. We see that with fake voice, fake video, fake evidence one day. It creates new vulnerabilities. And in a way, in some respect, and I'm working a lot on that, it makes the job of the law enforcement agency a lot more difficult. Look at encryption. More and more, everything on the internet is encrypted. So it's a lot more difficult to have lawful interception. Decentralization. Now, with 5G, communication will be among two phones at local level, and you will not have a node, a central node, where you can plug something and intercept a conversation. Cryptocurrency. You don't have the same type of monitoring that you have for a central bank. So that's for the threat. The convergence between these high tech. I always take the simple example, but it's quite telling. If you take a drone, you take synthetic bio, and the possibility to process a virus in what is called a cloud lab, geolocalization by Galileo, and a football stadium, you can spread the disease on 20,000 people. So that's on the threat. On the opportunities, again, no need to develop them, but we know how much artificial intelligence will allow for more big data management, for detection of weak signals, which is very important for terrorism, to detect, as I said, patterns, new pattern, predictive policing, and so on, to object detection, recognition, face recognition at the border, robots, drones. All this will improve the effectiveness. And the third point is what I call the transformative impact. Probably in 5 years' time, because of artificial intelligence, we will not deliver justice in the way we do today. Maybe we will lose 30% of the judges, because for some sort of claims, especially the easy one, how to determine damages for a car accident, frankly, the computer will do that a lot more better than a judge, not for all the cases. So have we start thinking on the way it changed the role of justice, the role of border guard, the role of intelligence, and so on. So these three aspects are very important. The second one is sovereignty. We discover more and more that for some tech which are critical for security, we cannot no longer just rely on the Americans or the Chinese. We need to develop our own tech. I think 5G is the good example. We don't want just to buy Huawei. That was a big political issue. And if you take another very well-known company, and there is a lot of debate in the European Parliament, Palantir, amazing company on big data analytics. It's an American company, but many security services in Europe, believe it or not, just bought the Palantir software in the middle of the terrorist crisis. The third one, I alluded to that, is the balance between security.
And you could, if I may interrupt, if you could combine what you said about the potential, I mean, the threat that we may experience in the next months. What we saw that with all the digital tools is actually the players who are already in place, who are accelerated by these trends. So if these threats increase, obviously these existing players will grow even more. I mean, even if there was a lot of discussion about who is heading Zoom and their connection maybe back to China, we've seen they grew from 30 to 500 million users, if I'm not mistaken. So the crisis was an accelerator for these platforms.
Yeah. My third concern, not concern, but the third challenge is the balance between, as I said, security and privacy. Some people tend to believe that the GDPR is a major achievement, and we hope we can have that as a standard for the whole world. But in a way, we are competing with countries like the US and China, where they're not constrained by the same rules. And you know how much AI needs a lot of data. And that's why most of the leaders are in the Silicon Valley, because we are sending them every day billions of data for free. The fourth one is social media, internet. It's more and more, and I said that one of the my thought after the COVID crisis is the spread of different sort of content. We have algorithm amplification. If you look at YouTube, they always try to keep you online as long as possible by pushing you at the borderline. We have gaming. I think we have not realized how much games are a way to communicate between people in an encrypted way, a way to disseminate propaganda as well as probably launder money. We have that's something we need to address a lot more. The last point, I mentioned that before, is what I call the technophobia. We need to be a lot more pedagogic if we want to develop all this tech in Europe. If I take my country, Belgium, the telecom operator is in deep trouble in the southern part of the country because people are more and more reluctant to see 5G developed because they feel the impact on health and so forth. So pedagogy, more explanation is key in this respect.
Tell us two things. I mean, these are a bit direct questions, but feel free to answer them as you wish. We talked about explaining that and making sure that there is buy-in, because otherwise you end up with this technophobia, which actually is a long history. I mean, the anti-vaccine movement is also building the same kind of feelings. But then you see that a lot of the communication is built on technology. So there is an AI strategy for Europe or for Germany or for France or for Belgium. And that probably talks to a certain elite. But for the general public, it's sometimes very cryptic. And secondly, we don't explain what you mentioned about what can it bring. So how come these policymaking are still very focused, very technocentric, and don't really address the societal impact it is. What needs to be changed? Is it because the parliament is not enough engaged? Is it because we have sometimes a little bit administrative view of things? Tell us how we can change that.
Well, in the community with which I'm working most, the law enforcement and justice community, as I've said before, these are not by definition geeks. So just to themselves appropriate, understand, use all this tech, and anticipate, in fact, to define their needs in 5 years' time. The defense community is much better to this respect. If you ask the head of an army what sort of device, weapons he needs in 5 years' time, he will give you piles of documents. If you ask that to the head of the police or the head of the intelligence, he won't be in a position to answer because they are so mobilized on the day-to-day work. So I would say the first step would be for those who need these tools to understand better and invest. And that's why I have pushed a lot, and now it has been decided by the 27 Ministers of Interior to create an innovation hub among all the justice and home affairs agencies, Europol, Eurojust, CEPOL, Frontex, and the like, so that we create a sort of ecosystem where people do try and experiment all this and develop a vision and express their needs. So that's the first step. The second step, as you said, for politicians as well, that requires some sort of investment. I'm not an expert myself. It takes some time and some energy to invest and try to understand. At the workshop to which I invited you, we had someone explaining quantum computing for a non-engineer. Frankly, it's not that crystal clear and easy to understand. So, and third, and I think we need to avoid that debate in Parliament are so black and white that it may lead to a ban on something. Because, of course, we need to be extremely vigilant because no one wants the social control model in China. No one wants that. But does it mean we should not have CCTV or facial recognition? I don't believe so. So we need to find a much more subtle system, what we call privacy by design, security by design, and that requires a lot more investment by politicians. Then on the public at large, frankly, I just don't know. We're not that good in just explaining our policy as a rule. So this is even more difficult. But there is a need, yeah. Probably our children are a lot more tech savvy than we are. So it should not be too difficult for them.
Talking about the tech savviness, could you give us some examples of the frontiers of where you see really the next big thing in technologies that have a security impact, and maybe how we can embed this technology by design, maybe in gaming, or you mentioned about these echo chambers we see in social media. We have not really solved that issue too. I mean, there was a big debate during the US elections 2016, but has that been really solved? This polarizing?
The big no, it's exactly why we need this innovation hub, because we need to confront law enforcement people with all the potential of all this disruptive tech and draw the lesson from it. If I take something which I don't suggest that I'm understanding every aspect, but COVID has probably shown that a virus may completely disrupt society. So, so this is very serious. So far, and it's still the case, we believe that, for instance, terrorist organizations are not in a position to process a virus. They may try to do that on a small scale by putting some substance in an envelope, a letter, but not process that on a large scale. It's too difficult to weaponize. But if now it's a lot more easy to process a virus through synthetic bio, and you get more information through open tech on internet and so on, you can process that in a cloud. Then you need to find a policy response on that. So it's not just, it's more being in a position to assess all the risk linked to this development in society, so that we can very early in the process define flanking measures to avoid misuse of this tech. For instance, AI, it's very there. I think the Commission has done an excellent job in trying to develop a human-centric, European value-centric AI, and we need now to design rules to ensure that algorithms just not reinforce bias. We see a worldwide protest after the killing of this American by the police, Floyd, and we know how much the algorithm may just amplify existing bias. And so how can we ensure in the future that what we develop at the border on facial recognition does not lead to that negative aspect? But I would say detection of weak signal, as you said, on internet, Facebook, I understand through what they call computational inference, can detect people close to or prone to commit suicide by just looking at changing the wording of the messages on messengers or the picture that they post on one of these platforms. And it's amazing. So, but that's something. Do we want to exploit? It's first a question of value, because you may, among, let's say, in my field, the 20,000 people that the intelligence service in France have assessed to be highly radicalized, maybe to determine what I call the tipping point. That is, when these people start preparing an attack, do we want to go that far and use the same methods?
And you can imagine immediately the topics about Minority Report coming up, you know. So
exactly. But we've seen again, it may be something that people criticize because it's part of the state surveillance. But I was impressed to see the police in Brussels using drones to monitor the confinement and the way people were behaving in park, and they were not too close, not in a crowd, and so on. Properly used, that could improve the way the police function.
May we? I mean, we could go on for long. It's really fascinating. Thank you very much, Gilles. One of my last question would be about you talked about speed at the beginning of our discussion, and that probably the point of the adoption. And then you talked about your innovation hub, which I think is a very important initiative you took, and I think it has not been probably easy to get everybody around the table, and would be very happy to contribute on the vision but how this relates to the regulation, because you mentioned GDPR, great achievement, thought leadership. I mean, about privacy, probably we were earlier on, but it took 5 years to do it. And we all know that the generations of technologies are not anymore in years, it's in months. There's this whole point about pop-up regulation, which on one side allows you to be much agile and also takes a little bit of the steam of people saying, okay, once we regulate, it's in for forever, and then it's too difficult to change. Would that be, do you see this happening anytime soon at the European level? Is this maybe an innovation also in our regulatory process? Because we also need to innovate on this.
True. For me, speed, and in a way, the fact that more and more all these disruptive techs are developed by private companies. In the good old days, it was more the state driving the process. So government were informed of what was in the pipeline. Now you have in the Silicon Valley, in secret, something which develops, and we are confronted at the very end of the process when the tech is available. Some months we just heard that one company owned by Elon Musk, was working on a chip that you insert in your brain so that you can talk to a computer, and then all of a sudden it's on the market. So public-private partnership are very key in this respect. And in addition to the hub, I would like the Commission to set up in the field of security, of course, a sort of strategic council on internet security technology, so that private sector researchers and policymakers can sit together and in a way anticipate. we need to do a lot more. The Chinese are doing extremely well. They've defined the sort of tech they want in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. We need to be in the same position and be ahead of the curve in this respect.
Gilles, this is a fantastic conclusion for JEDI, who is really the moonshot factory, as we call ourselves. It's all about the next big thing. You're a true JEDI, and we really appreciated this conversation. So thanks again. Good luck for all these endeavors, and stay safe. See you very soon.
Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.